Well, it's a great pleasure to be with you today, and I wanted to share with you some of the thinking that has been occurring in the United States recently around money. I think all of us are interested in money, but not all of us have connected the issue of money with localization and local economy building. Now, by show of hands here, how many people try to buy local some of the time every week? All right, so I let the record show that every hand went up in the air. Now, this may just be an odd collection of people here today, but I think this is putting a finger on a trend. And I think everyone here understands that local ownership and local business matters. Local business is key for prosperity. And the reason is very simple. Local businesses spend more of their money locally. A key study that's been done on this occurred about 10 years ago in the city of Austin. They analyzed the impact of $100 spent at a local bookstore and $100 spent at a Borders bookstore, a chain bookstore. The Borders has since gone out of business. $100 spent at the Borders, in red there, left $13 in the local economy. $100 spent at the local bookstore left $45. So roughly speaking, by the same bookstore, by the same book at the same price at the local bookstore, you get 3 times the jobs, 3 times the income and the wealth effects, 3 times the tax collections, 3 times the charitable giving. It makes a big difference. Why was there this difference? Well, the Borders didn't have a high-level management team on the ground. The local bookstore did. The Borders didn't use local lawyers and accountants. The local bookstore did. The Borders didn't advertise on local radio and TV. And the Borders did not have a stream of profits coming into the community. If you generalize this point, it would really be unusual to find 2 similar businesses, one locally owned, one not locally owned, where you would get a higher so-called multiplier effect from the non-local business. And in point of fact, we have 24 studies that have been done on this question, half in the United States, half outside the United States, and they all show that for every dollar you spend at a local business rather than its non-local competitor, you get 2 to 4 times the economic impact. And there is not a single study that has shown otherwise. Now, that's the good news about local. The bad news is that we haven't figured out yet how to nurture local businesses. So we've already established that we have a very locavorish crowd here. So I want to ask 2 more questions to all of you. First question is, how many of you do your banking at a local bank or credit union? Okay, most of the hands come up, the rest we'll take out to the alley afterwards. Next question is, how many people here have their super funds invested in local small business? Okay, I see 2 hands that have come up. Now this is outrageous. 70% of the jobs in the Australian economy are local small business jobs. And yet you, the most locavorish people in the country, are systematically over-investing your life savings in global companies and not investing anything in local business. This is a huge problem, and it's as much a problem in the United States as it is here. And the reason for this problem is that we have securities laws that were enacted during the early Jurassic period. And these securities laws make it extremely expensive for local small businesses to take money from the 99% of investors who are not wealthy, because we have constructed our securities laws around this concept of accredited investor. If you are in that top 1% of wealth, we allow you to invest in anyone, anytime, no questions asked. But if you're in the other 99%, sorry, you can't do it unless lawyers paper the transaction for $25,000, $50,000, $100,000. No wonder no one does these transactions. But here's the flip side. If we were to fix this market failure, if we were to make it easier and more sane for people to invest locally, think of what could be done with the money shifted from your super funds into local business. The total value of super funds right now is $1.3 trillion Australian. If your capital markets were working efficiently, 70% of that money would be going into local small business. That's about $1 trillion shift. That works out to about $40,000 for every Australian man, woman, and child of new capital coming in to support new local businesses. I suspect you could do some good things with that money. In the United States, we have come up with a bunch of ideas on how we can begin to move money into local small business and deal with this problem of securities laws. Now, I want to mention first some of the ideas that we've come up with that are sort of tiptoeing around securities laws, because these are things that are happening but sort of not at a very visible level in Australian society as well. One example is we work with banks, and we convince banks to set up special certificates of deposit, the proceeds of which support targeted local business. Equal Exchange is a fair trade business in the United States, and they set up a relationship with Eastern Bank and now have a $1 million line of credit that's just for equal exchange, and people can invest in fair trade certificates of deposit. Co-ops are not as heavily regulated as other kinds of private businesses. So many people lend money to their co-ops or use their co-ops to invest in linked local businesses. We have examples in both of our countries of investment clubs. The most successful one in the United States is called Lion, Local Investment Opportunities Network, based in Port Townsend, Washington. And they deal with a problem which is that even if you're legally allowed to get investors in, you're not necessarily legally allowed to go to people you don't know. You have to know people before you approach them for an investment. So they have a party once a month where they bring investors and local business people together, and at the end of the party, they have a checklist of who now has the relationships so that they can spread around the business plans. There are patronage sites like Kickstarter where people donate money to new businesses. And if you donate money and get back, say, a thank you note or a T-shirt, or maybe if you put $1,000 into a brewery, you get back a beer named after you, these things aren't regarded as securities. So this is also an end run around securities law. And some businesses also do pre-selling. An example is Awaken Cafe in Oakland. They struck a deal where they basically said, you know, we need $100,000 to move our store to a new site. If you buy $1,200 of coffee today for $1,000, as soon as we get that new store going, you will get that, 20% discount. They got almost all of their capital for moving their store that way, and this did not require a securities filing. Now, all of that said, we really need to go after securities law. We need to change things. Now, in the United States, as is true here in Australia, there are some approaches to issuing local stock for a business in cost-effective ways. So this picture here is of the Merc, or the Mercantile in Powell, Wyoming. Powell, Wyoming is a small community in a remote mountainous area. They had no place to buy socks and underwear, and they decided they needed to build their own general store. They needed a couple of $100,000. They created a local stock issue and sold the stock issue like Girl Scout cookies door to door. Got the thing financed. This thing has been profitable since day one. There are now busloads of tourists that come into Powell, Wyoming to see the Powell Merck miracle. And guess what? Where does everyone do their shopping? Well, because they're all owners, they of course shop at the Merck. The key for this to happen was they got volunteer legal assistance. Because if they had to pay a lawyer to set up this local stock, it might have cost them $50,000 or $100,000. That really bothered me. And I started to think about how inequitable it is. You know, in the United States, we have 1,000 casinos. And the reason we have securities laws are to prevent grandmas from going into some kind of stock deal where they get sold swampland in Florida. But grandma can go into 1,000 casinos. And when she walks through the door, do they say, "Excuse me, Grandma, but are you an accredited gambler?" No. Do they say, "Before you play blackjack, Grandma, will you read this thick disclosure document on all the risks of playing blackjack?" No, you don't have to do that. So we have two systems of risk management. One system called gambling where you can lose everything for nothing, and probably will. And another system called supporting local small business in the interest of economic development, and that is illegal. This infuriated me. So I wrote a piece for the Federal Reserve Journal recommending a $100 exemption. $100, no legal questions asked. As risky as a dinner for two at a new Chinese restaurant. Well, the Securities and Exchange Commission was then petitioned to implement the $100 exemption. They got hundreds of letters. They didn't know what to do with it. Last year, at about this time, a committee on Capitol Hill was holding a hearing, and the head of the Securities Exchange Commission was called before them. And one of the questions she was asked was, whatever became of that proposal for a $100 exemption? And she said, well, maybe in a few months we'll call together, a study committee and look at this. They went ballistic. And unanimously, Democrats and Republicans working together, they passed a $10,000 exemption. Now, that was a little more than I expected. In the Senate, they whittled that back down to $2,000. And in May, President Obama signed our crowdfunding law into effect. And for the first time in 80 years, local investing by the 99% is legal. Now, this is not the end of the story, because people need to buy and sell their stock shares. And we're going to need to start creating local stock exchanges. They won't be brick and mortar institutions. They'll be virtual exchanges. This guy on the left, Michael Van Patten at Mission Markets, actually has a platform that he will sell to any locality for $50,000 to $100,000. The first taker may be the state of Hawaii, which last year passed a law in the state legislature mandating that their economic developers take local stock markets seriously. Now, the guy on the right thinks $100,000 is too expensive, and he wants to set up a grassroots local stock exchange in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, called the LanX. He has a great name, by the way. His name is Trexler Profit. Once you have a stock exchange, we still have to create a diversified pool, because no one should take what I'm saying as throw all of your life savings in your favorite local business. You want to create a pool of many local businesses so you're hedging your risk. The problem is that the securities laws around pools are as bad as they are around stock exchanges or the issuance of stock. In the United States, we have 7,500 mutual funds that unaccredited investors can put their money into. Every single one of them does not put a penny in local small business. The only institutions you can find that do this are there's a handful of nonprofit revolving loan funds like this guy runs, Steve Fireman in Columbus, Ohio, and they do loans to multiple local businesses, but we have a lot of work to do there. I think in the meantime, as we are building up this universe of local stocks, local stock exchanges, local investment funds, the home run of how we can start moving stuff now is to take advantage of self-directed IRAs in my country and self-directed super funds in your country. You can actually get your money into any kind of local business if you start moving your super fund money into a custodian-directed fund. And this, to me, will be the home run of local investment, because once we start moving millions of dollars, soon hundreds of millions of dollars in this direction, the world will wake up to the possibilities here. Now, will local investment pay off? One of the reasons we are skeptical about this is we think that our Main Street stock exchanges have done so well. We expect that our super funds are going to do 8%, 10%, 12% per year. In point of fact, if you look historically at the stock market in the United States over 140 years, the typical rate of return historically is 2.6% per year. And your return, while I haven't done the math as carefully, isn't a heck of a lot better. In fact, your mainstream market right now is about at the price right now as it was in 2007. I suggest that local investments can easily beat 2.6% if you pick them carefully. And in fact, some of the examples that I shared with you, like Equal Exchange, do about 5% per year. Here's the point. Once the dam begins to crack, once people realize that they're not stuck legally or institutionally throwing their money down the rat hole of global corporations, a whole new local revolution will start to take place. Think about it. What happens in the United States? We're ultimately going to do a $15 trillion shift from Wall Street to Main Street. That's what's necessary to make the market efficient. What happens when the first $1 trillion shifts? Well, suddenly there's less demand for stocks, mainstream Wall Street stocks, and their prices go down. And there's more demand for local securities, and their prices go up, and they look a lot more attractive to people. So then the next trillion moves, and the next trillion. This transition could occur with dramatic speed. Where I want to leave you, and where I leave my book, Local Dollars, Local Cents, is with a children's story, which I think is appropriate here, because so many of us who are committed to local food and buying local and supporting our communities, and yet we put our money 100% in global companies, we're under this illusion that wealth is very far away from home. The book that impressed me is called A Blue So Blue by Jean-Francois Dumont. And in this book, a boy is obsessed with the color blue. He paints blue wherever he goes, but there's one shade of blue that he dreams about that mesmerizes him, and he can't figure out where this blue comes from. So he goes on a global tour to find this blue. He goes to the Louvre, can't find it in any of the paintings there. He goes on an ocean voyage looking for that shade of blue in the water and doesn't find it. He goes to a blues bar in New Orleans. Nope, not there. He goes to a desert, and there a blue-hooded stranger says, "What you've been looking for may never have been very far away." And then suddenly it dawns on the boy. The shade of blue was in his mother's eyes. It was at home all along. This is the lesson we need to learn about our money. Thank you very much.